I'm going to buck the trend and stay seated so we can get into conversation quickly. And I'm glad I'm going last. It's a lot of work's already been done on the panel for this important conversation. I think it's actually a good positioning, having the tax conversation late in the day. It's a sexier conversation. More people understand it than 5 and 10 years ago. And there's a lot of work to do to continue to figure out ways that this conversation can be accessible and actionable for Americans. So I'd start a little bit where Jeremie started with some of the early work on the theory of an asset-based theory of well-being, right? So Michael Sheridan and Assets of the Poor, very fundamental line early on in the book, which I think really creates the backbone for a lot of the work we're doing now, is that assets matter in ways that are fundamentally different than income to the financial well-being and the mobility of this country, and that institutions matter in determining who can build those assets and who can't. So that right from the get-go, we're baked into a structural conversation of inequality and not to a conversation about just individual efficacy. Another piece of that, right, so you can't get more institutional than taxes. You can't get more institutional than the US tax code. And there's a way of thinking about markets as being all about efficiency, right? All they can do is allocate between supply and demand, right? They come to a price point. Markets are efficient or inefficient. There's not really a judgment or a value in that. But when it comes to justice, the government is all about distribution, if that's fair or unfair. And I think beyond being fair or unfair, that role of government is also around what are the conditions that create growth and productivity for the maximum number of people in a democracy. So the tax code is at the center of a government market conversation. For good or ill, we have to look there. And increasingly over the last 20 years, more and more of our social programming in this country has been put through the tax code because it's been politically untenable to have these conversations put to a vote because of all of the different political ways that we are structuring the polarization that's happening in this country in many ways. So, fundamentally, we are all of a point up here in some ways that says that more assets under management by low-income families is good for those families, it's good for their communities, it's good for the economy, it's good for our democracy. And yet we have a very counterintuitive and regressive way that the tax code, which is progressive, even mildly so, on income, flips on its head and becomes regressive in an instant when it comes to wealth accumulation and how it drives inequality in this country. So Warren Buffett said it better than anybody, right? He gets 35 cents on the dollar, right? For his home mortgage, his secretary gets 10 cents. You add that up in a number of different ways in Jeremie's slides, and you can see how many of the unintentional, I think there's plenty of intentional things, but many of the things that are happening in terms of wealth inequality in the tax code were not put there specifically because there was it's just a matter of we haven't really thought about, should we flip it when it comes to wealth incentives in the tax code? Should we make sure that they are not there just riding on the progressivity of an income tax, so that when you have different rates for people making different amounts, when you flip that, making sure that there is either some flat rate or some intentional progressivity the other direction for folks that you think it's most important to help them build wealth. I would say that there's maybe 3 kinds of income, right? We actually have the interest income, we have earned income, and we also have a lot of transfer income that's also in the case. And I think one of my mentors, and a lot of folks know with Bob Friedman, would say, the tax code right now rewards the rich, misses the middle, and penalizes the poor. When it rewards the rich, it gets very much into both the capital gains, the differential rate of capital gains that you talked about, but also to Jeremie's point, when you can buy a bigger house, right? You have tax deductibility up to $1 million mortgage, right? Most people don't have $1 million home or even some portion of that. But incrementally, you're in a 35% tax rate, you get a 35 cent on the dollar deduction for $1 million mortgage. That's a lot of regressive assistance to build your assets. And similarly, I'd say retirement as well, although it's a little bit different because those are deferrals. There will be tax there will be tax taken when people spend their retirement down in retirement, but they are much higher rates of deferral in terms of the high rates that one could use them for than most Americans actually can save for retirement. It misses the middle because of this kind of neutral gray zone where there's a lot of people that aren't filing for their tax liabilities. They don't itemize. And it penalizes the poor because we have asset limits, where a lot of the means-tested programs in the country make it hard for people to even have an incentive to save because of these concerning limits that may affect them, whether they're saving for college, whether they're saving for other issues. So, I think that the one thing that to get to a solutions conversation, which I think we can do more of in our back and forth, is that within the existing tax system, there are already policies that work really well, and we should do more to build on those and look more at why they work and how they can work even better. So in terms of the EITC, that is definitely a refundable credit that has been one of the most effective poverty alleviation strategies in the country, and yet every year it does come under attack. It's not, in terms of the expansions of it that could be more helpful and the permanency of it, and with the child tax credit and the American Opportunity Tax Credit, these are all things that are fought for year after year. They're not done deals in the tax code. I would say nothing's ever a done deal in the tax code, and that's actually a good thing, right, for all of us. That's why we can sit here and talk about reform. There is a saver's credit in the tax code already, but because it's not a refundable credit, it only hits a real small slice of the folks who might be eligible otherwise for it. So the idea that for every dollar you're saving, you get a credit of 50 cents on the dollar, up to a certain amount if you are low income, under $35,000. However, it's not refundable, and even if it is refundable, the other issue there is that if you're not itemizing your taxes, you're not getting the opportunity to get these credits. More than half the country doesn't itemize their taxes at this point in time, so again, we have to kind of look at the tax code with eyes wide open about how to best design it so that most of the folks that we're talking about making sure that get the benefit of the incentives that are available there truly can tap into those. And I think as well, refundable credits can be hard to understand, right? There's a lot of behavioral insights work going on. There was great research a while ago now with H&R Block where they just changed a lot of the language from refundable credit to a match. You get a match, and so they found that, if you were going to match the tax return with a 20% credit, it increased participation in that activity by 17% among low-income folks. So there's a lot of actual bipartisan and across-industry support over time for a refundable credit that is really renamed a match, and there's a lot of early discussion going on about renaming and expanding a saver's credit as USA Match, which would be a more direct match, refundable, and going straight into the account so that it truly does help somebody build savings. I'll spend a little bit more time on the retirement savings piece, and I know we'll go out of that. Urban Institute, who really should be on this panel, they've been the leader on so much of the research that's helped us all understand the dimensions of this issue. But some of their most recent work does show that, even with the kind of tax code issues that we're talking about, making credits refundable, doing a lot in that space, it doesn't necessarily solve all the problems. Even just in retirement, right, the average retirement ownership for a white household is $130,000. For blacks, it's for African Americans, it's $19,000, and for Hispanics and Latinos, it is $12,000 average. That is basically a $100,000 gap in retirement savings, and that is quadruple the rate it was in 1989. And Tom Shapiro's in the audience. There's similar look at what inheritances and other things that have quadrupled in terms of differences in rates over time, over the same period. A lot of this has to do with workplace savings. Employer platforms are the place where savings can be automated and take place seamlessly, but the quality of jobs and who has access to workplace savings is quite different. And so even if we did build on the employer platform. It doesn't solve the entire problem. Certainly with urban, they made a point of saying that 47% of white households have access to workplace savings, 40% of African Americans have access, and 28% of Latinos have access at the workplace. And yet, even though we say that, we're saying that even though African American access is closer to white access, those rates, those differential rates of savings and retirement are still much larger, right? So they're much more associated with Latino rates of savings and retirement than those white-headed households that they're looking at. So there's more going on there, and a lot of that has to do with not just having access to the savings at the place, but what are they? Are they able to consistently save? Are they investing in the same kinds of returns? Is there less of a safety net and a focus so that a lot of times they're having to dip into that retirement savings because of other lack of assets, so that they're needing to help out friends and family, work for themselves, manage through these crises in ways that keep them from accumulating retirement savings? So those are a lot of dimensions. I'd say that the real kind of consensus all the way around from a policy perspective, from what makes sense in terms of policy for retirement, would be to auto-enroll people at the workplace, to auto-escalate enrollment at the workplace, and to also, make sure that there is that refundable match that's going in to help low dollar, smaller dollar savers accumulate sufficient funds for retirement. That's supported by industry increasingly. It's been supported in bipartisan ways over the years. The issues come down to politics more than policy in terms of where there's areas of discord. And I think the other cautionary note for us all in that sense is that it's to your point of deficits in this conversation, because I do think that to the degree that we have $500 billion worth of tax spending in play, the first point of order a lot of times in a political environment will be to take the savings and put the entire thing toward deficit reduction versus actually take heed of the fact that most of our social program funding has been going through the tax code for many years. So I think that part of the conversation we have to have and be ready to address is making the case that it is not just about finding more efficient ways to achieve social purpose through the tax code, but that the savings don't automatically go without a conversation and a real dialogue and a real fight, specifically only to cutting a marginal tax rate, which is already at it's strongly competitive rates, but that we look a little bit more about what we'd be losing in terms of the incentives to help Americans become more financially secure.